Our first episode or first meeting for the pop-up neuroscience review. Hopefully it'll be a recurring event where we have lots of different topics in neuroscience that I'm going to be reviewing as a way of giving you an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the neuroscience that's going on in the world and to get some more cutting edge neuroscience at your doorstep without having to read some of the science yourself. So my job is to sort of translate some of that for you to make it understandable, and then also provide you with some information so that you can learn more about your brain and hopefully use it to optimize your brain or to think better, to feel better, to be better, whatever that might be. So the topic that I chose for tonight is sleep. So it's actually based on a paper that I read in a magazine or a journal article or a journal called Nature Neuroscience. And the title of the paper is called Sleep Aromatherapy Curbs Conditioned Fear. So I'm going to break that actually down because even that title, for some of you may not know what that actually means. So I'm going to break that down a little bit and give you a little bit more information on what that actually means. So I've identified 4 learning objectives that we'll go through tonight, and a way of teaching you a little bit about kind of learning and memory, but it's embedded within the idea of fear and how different cues can affect our memory. So the 4 learning objectives, and this is starting to sound really formal, but it's really not that formal. It's just an opportunity for you to learn about neuroscience. And it's actually a really fun little study, or a fun grouping of studies that I've found. So the 4 learning objectives include conditioning as a form of memory. So some of you might know about conditioning. I'm going to talk about it in a second, but conditioning is a basic form of memory. So it's a really useful tool to help us understand how the brain works in terms of forming memories. The second learning objective is consolidation as a form of memory and reconsolidation of those memories. So that word consolidation essentially just means how do we make memories solid? The idea that we can re-solidify them or reconsolidate them is another topic within the memory field. The third learning objective is not really so much an objective, but more as an introduction to some of the brain areas that are involved in memory. So I'm not going to go over that too much, but I will just highlight some of the areas that are involved, at least within this area of memory study. Some of those are probably going to be familiar to you. And then the fourth thing is I really want to leave you with an opportunity to take some of this knowledge and use it personally. You know, I've been studying neuroscience for a very long time, and well, not as long as some other people, but for me it's been a long time, and I've really enjoyed it, and I really feel that it's been able to enhance what I've been doing with my life, and I feel like I want to offer that to other people so that you can take some of this and use it to enhance how you already are. So I guess what I'll do is I'm just going to review what this paper was talking about. So it was actually a review paper in itself, but it was a really cool paper because what it actually shows is that fear memories that were formed in the daytime could be extinguished during sleep that was happening later, so after the memory. And how we extinguished this was using cues that were associated. So in this particular case, it was a smell that was associated with that fear. So we're going to break that down in, a little bit deeper. But before I get into that, I want to just talk a little bit about some of the principles that you need in order to understand what was actually happening. So this is a bit of a review of what's happening or what's going on when we actually form a memory. So conditioning is actually something that you will remember. So conditioning is a basic form of memory. You probably, if you've ever taken introductory psychology, you would have heard of the term classical conditioning. It's basic Pavlovian learning. So you probably have heard of Pavlov, or at the very least of Pavlov's dog. The basic principle of the classical conditioning or Pavlovian conditioning is that the dog salivates at the sight of food. So we know that. That's something that is natural. So a normal dog will salivate when it sees food. in order to create a situation of conditioning, what happens is the researcher, or you, if you want to try this at home with your own pets, you can say, for example, ring a bell just before the food is presented. So every time you go to feed your dog, you ring a bell just before, and then the dog starts to associate that bell with the food. Eventually then, what happens is that the dog will actually salivate just in the presence of the bell and not necessarily in presence of the food or irrespective of the food. It just starts to salivate. Why does that happen? It's because it's formed an association. So it's paired the idea that a bell ringing is going to predict food, which is a reward for the dog. It wants to eat. So it's already prepping itself to eat that food. That's probably pretty... So similar, I was going to actually use another example that I'll postpone, but the doorbell just rang. That cues my dog to bark because she knows that someone's going to be at the other end of that door, and she likes to get attention, so she likes being petted, and she will be really, really excited when people come to the door. She has been cued. I'm not going to answer that door, so she actually isn't going to learn what's on the other side of that door, but she knows that 8 times out of 10, when that doorbell rings, there's someone over there that's going to give her a lot of attention. So, thanks, Jet, for participating in this show. I do want to give you another example, just because I think this is one that probably most of us have encountered, and food poisoning. So if you've ever had food poisoning, you probably have a pretty strong conditioning to the food that you ate just before you threw up. Essentially what's happening is the same situation, except here it's something that's very aversive. So you ate something, it made you sick, and then your body and your brain conditioned yourself or associated that food with vomiting. It's an evolutionary adaptive mechanism that we have, because if something makes us vomit, it's probably poisonous, as is the case with poisoning. So we want to remember that in some way or learn from that experience to not eat that food in the future. So I had an example one that came to mind was egg rolls that I had, and so something was bad in them, I ate them, and then I felt sick and I was throwing up, and then it took me a very long time to eat those again because I associated that taste and that smell and the sight of them with the idea of the vomiting. That brings up another concept, and that's the idea of extinction. Actually, maybe just to, I'm just going to show you a thing just to, where it is. So I'm just going to show you my screen here for a second. So that you can see, because I have an image that is a nice way of just showing what's actually happening. So it's the food this is going back to the dog example. So we have the food, it's called the unconditioned stimulus here, and then the salivation is the unconditioned response. You pair them together, and what you end up is a conditioned response or conditioned stimulus here, so the bell at the very bottom there. And it activates the response, which is the salivation. So, okay. So, the other part then of this is extinction, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but just to this is part of what's happening in the study that we reviewed, where we actually extinguish some fear memories. So extinction is exactly what it sounds like. It's another feature of classical conditioning. And what happens is let's say the dog example, if you continue to pair the food with if you continue to present the bell and no food is present, then eventually that learning, that association that the bell predicts the food will become extinguished. And so the animal or the dog will no longer respond with salivation because it doesn't think anymore that the bell is predicting the food. So extinguishing is kind of like relearning, because you're learning to deassociate something, or that association is no longer meaningful. Thinking about Jet and how she barked at the doorbell, I actually don't answer the door very often, yet she has not yet extinguished that behavior that the doorbell predicts someone coming at the other end who's going to give her lots of attention. So maybe we're working there with something that's well ingrained. Dogs were born with the ability to bark at doorbells. But I'll leave that for another topic. So, so I think conditioning and extinctions are two basic mechanisms of learning and memory. It represents the brain and the mind's ability to learn and remember an association, but then also forget or unlearn that association when the association is no longer meaningful or when that cue no longer predicts the previous outcome. So, for example, with the bell and the food. The examples that I gave you were all about food, essentially, and they represented either appetitive or unpleasant experiences. So either you want the food or you don't want the food because it previously made you sick. But our brains also learn to form associations with emotions. So fear, for example, is an emotion that we can learn to form associations with. In the lab, we test this with very simple fear-invoking tactics. One way to do this is to shock a person, very mildly, of course, but nonetheless, it's providing a shock to something or to someone. I'll give you an example of how we might fear condition ourselves. Imagine that you're at work and your boss doesn't want you to be on a social media site. They call in a neuroscientist and an engineer, and they rig up some apparatus. And every time you go onto your social media site, there is a shock that is delivered through your chair into your body, and you experience that at the site of the social media page coming up or whatever it might be. That experience there, that zap, will cause you to associate the social media with the startle that you get. So, of course, it doesn't have to be anything too drastic, but just enough that you're startled or you're shocked. So that becomes an association, that becomes a pairing. This is classical conditioning happening. So while you're diligently working away, so imagine actually if you're working away and all of a sudden you didn't pull up a social media site, but I've pulled up a social media site and just plastered it on your screen. If you had been receiving those shocks and pairing it before and learned that association, you would immediately feel that shock just because you knew that it had predicted, you'd feel that startle or that fear, or you'd clench up just because it had predicted that there would be a shock that happened in the past. This could actually cause you to become fearful of it. So if you actually saw the social media site come up, all of those responses, that tension, all of that, that's a fear response. So you could actually become learned fearful of your social media site, which for your boss would be actually quite great, but possibly not for you, because if you end up going home, you want to be able to watch it or play with it very leisurely. So this fear conditioning is actually the type of conditioning that was used in the study in order to see what would happen or how we could possibly extinguish this. So in this study, it was a study reviewed by John Wixted. He's a neuroscientist. And he reviewed a series of other studies that were done, but there's one in particular that was particularly interesting. And in this study, what they did was they presented participants with random images of faces. And when half the images were presented, the participants received those mild shocks that I talked about. This caused fear conditioning, so that when the participant saw the face that was paired with the shock, they became afraid of that face. So essentially what the researchers did was that they created 8 scary faces. Some were scary, some were not, but the ones that were paired with the shock were scary. There's a second part to this study, and this was actually the really fun part, was that not only were there faces that were scary or not scary, but the researchers also paired those faces with one of 2 odors, which meant then that the participants associated the scary face with one smell and a non-scary face with a different smell. And there was control groups to compare those. I'm going to show you a diagram of this that comes right from the study because it's helpful to see what I'm talking about. Sometimes the visuals are important for people. So here you can see this was a figure that was taken right from the study, the Nature Neuroscience paper that I was looking at. And so essentially what you have is you have these two faces. So you can see that there's one face, there's a fear alert above one of the faces, and you can see that it was paired with an orange smell. And then with the other two faces, one didn't have any fear, so no shock was delivered. And then in both those conditions, the people smelt pine. So orange and pine, very different experiences. So basically what we were doing, or the researchers were doing, was you could activate this fear by presenting the orange smell or the pine smell, depending on which face was present. Okay, so I'm just going to get back to my screen. I guess it doesn't really matter. You don't have to be looking at that, but nonetheless, you can continue to watch me. So this was really interesting. So basically, they had these comparison groups, and then what they actually did was, so this memory was formed when the participants were awake. So obviously, they were very conscious of what was happening. They at least knew that the smell was present. They didn't know exactly what was being conditioned, but they did feel that there was the fear was happening there, so they could experience the fear when the faces were presented with the shock. But the sleep part was the kicker in this study. So the design of the study allowed the researchers to investigate the effects of presenting just the smell while the participants were sleeping. So imagine that you had learned that a fear was fear was associated with a particular smell. What they did was they believed, or in scientific terms, they hypothesized that although the smell would initially elicit the fear response, eventually it would not, and then when the person woke up, they would no longer react. So essentially what the researchers were doing were trying to interfere with the memory that any fear was associated, or any face was associated with a fear or a particular smell. So they're trying to erase these memories. So the study was designed to see if you could erase the fear that was associated with the smell while the person slept, so while they weren't even conscious of what was actually going on. So it's already been established that we can actually form memories when we sleep. So for example, in other studies, the researchers have done the pairing while the person was sleeping and found that they showed the fears when they were awake. So if you were passively laying there, sleeping in the lab, they would present you with some of the stimuli. So it would be a mild shock or something that wouldn't wake you up, but would elicit the fear response, and pair that with some kind of smell. When they woke up, they would present just the smell, and the people would feel the same fear, and they would exhibit the signs of fear, so all the biomarkers of a fear response. So we already know that we can do this when the person is sleeping. But what we don't know is whether we can actually erase these memories. So can we extinguish these memories while the person is sleeping as well? Erasing the memories is a really cool concept that I think we'll get to at the very end to give you more detail about it. So I'm not going to get into too much detail about it now, but just know that essentially what happens when a memory is activated, it becomes very labile. It becomes very, I like to use the word open to interpretation. So if you start to remember something, the fact that you're remembering almost puts it into this space where the brain can actually add detail or remove detail to it. This is one of the reasons why eyewitness testimony is not particularly useful, because it's very sensitive to the last time we actually remembered something. So, returning to the paper though, we see that these participants who were exposed to the odor while they were sleeping woke up without the same fear of the odor or the faces. So essentially what the researchers were able to do was extinguish the fear conditioning that the people learned when they were awake, just by presenting them with the odor when they were sleeping. So why exactly did this happen? Well, they unlearned that the odor actually made that predicted a fear. So the odor was no longer salient in terms of a fear response. But what was really, really cool about this study was that not that just that the fear became impaired, but that the fear with the faces also became impaired. So something that wasn't even being manipulated directly in the person's sleep was losing an association. So the people failed to react to the faces because something else in their context, the smell, lost its saliency. So that's really, really interesting. And it's very, very powerful because it actually suggests that the context of fear alone, so the odor, which itself may not be necessarily an agent of fear, but the stuff that's all around our fear memory, so what we're processing, can actually be used as a treatment for erasing fears, even without the thing that causes the fear to be present. So, for example, you know, the scary face or a spider or whatever it might be something that you're afraid of. But if we manipulate the context around it, so some of the other things that are associated with that, we can actually manipulate your fear of that initial item or object. So I'm going to get back to that in 1 second. I'm just going to give you a quick little overview. So I'm going to tell you how we can actually use that, or how you can start to play with that and be a little neuroscientist on your own brain. But I just want to mention a couple things about what they found in terms of activation in the brain itself. So all of these processes are happening in the brain. We know that. Memory is a neurobiological process. So the researchers did all of this while they were taking snapshots of the participant's brain. And in those who maintained their fear, they found the typical activation of areas normally associated with fear and memory. So the hippocampus, you might remember from something else you've read or from something else you've heard me talk about. Also the amygdala. The amygdala is part of the limbic system, so part of our emotional center. But it's also, it's particularly good at sort of making note of or remembering or putting the label of an emotional fear together. So it's activated particularly when there's a shock, so fear conditioning. The hippocampus is more activated when there's just conditioning, doesn't have to be emotional. The amygdala comes in when it's emotional. So that's what we saw in the people who maintained their fears, where their fears weren't manipulated in any way. Those whose fears were manipulated, so who showed reduced fear, where we started to erase some of their fear, didn't show that same activation. They didn't have the same activation in their hippocampus, and they didn't have the same activation in their amygdala. This suggests that not only is the person not responding behaviorally to the fear, but their brain isn't even processing it as a fearful response. So almost as if we really are erasing our memory of that fear or the association. So I think that's a really cool study. I think it shows that there's a lot that can be done that's going on inside of our brain even when we're not aware of it. I also think it shows that how plastic our brain really is, and that's one of the key principles of work that I do, is reminding people and letting people know that our brain is changing all the time. It's changing as we experience things, it's changing as we don't experience things. There's always this change that's happening. This is particularly important for me working as a life coach because I'm trying to help people change, and I'm trying to create tools to help people change. And I think understanding how our brain works, knowing that it changes, is one of those tools. So thinking about the fact that we are changing all the time, our brain is changing all the time, might actually empower us to realize that we do have some control and we can seek change, and that change will be rewarded with changes in our brain. I'm reminded of a personal experience that I've had, and I'm just going to go over this briefly before I give you some homework to do. So I think back to when I first started in university in my first year, and I was a shy student, very afraid to put up my hand and ask a question in my class of like 200 students. So afraid that I almost would have a panic attack. Like my heart would start racing, my face would become flush, and it's just very, very scary. And I rarely did it. And then I think to my 4th year in university, where I got to the point where I was actually doing presentations to my class. And then when I started doing my graduate work, I was doing research talks in front of hundreds of people. And then not even a year ago, I gave a lecture in front of 1,500 people. And of course, I was so afraid of that. But every single time that I did that, I changed. I essentially lost that pairing that public speaking was a threatening event. It no longer caused that fear in me. And every time I do it, I realize that it isn't anything to be afraid of. I continue to go and speak, and I'm okay. So the salience, or that fear that I once had, starts to extinguish. And that's how we change. We go and we do things, and we put ourselves into situations where we lose those associations, or we form new associations. So, how can we use this knowledge? Well, it would be a little tricky, but pretend that you're a neuroscientist, and I'd like you to design your own study. So your hypothesis is that you can erase a fear memory of yours. I'm going to give the example of maybe you're afraid of dogs. Okay, so you can choose whatever memory that you have, and you can, or sorry, fear memory. So it has to be something that's fearful. And here's one suggestion, and I'm not saying that, I guess this is one of those like try it at home, don't try it at home, but I'm going to say try it at home, but you're just having fun with it, so see what you can do. So maybe one thing that you can do is you can go to bed and have the sound of dogs barking in the other room. So maybe that is enough to remind you that you're afraid of the dog, but what you're doing is you're passively also teaching your brain that there's nothing to be afraid of. So your brain will start to lose that association. And then you can go to a dog park, maybe. So obviously you'll be awake for this, but you could go to a dog park and just be around the dogs. And if the more dogs there are and the less anything happens to you, the better you're going to be, because you're going to start to extinguish that fear response. So almost in some ways, some of the worst things we do is continue to stay away from those things that are causing us fear. Instead, what we could do is approach them and realize that they aren't something that necessarily needs to cause us fear. And then we can reassociate or deassociate our fear with that particular experience. So there's a lot of other ones that you can think of. I don't know. You can potentially take a spider and let it crawl over you all at night, but I definitely wouldn't do that, so I'm not going to recommend that for you. So that's coming to the conclusion. What I'm going to post up after is a short video by Joseph Ledoux. He's a neuroscientist at the New York University, NYU. There's a couple of videos there, and it talks about how we can replace fear memories. And there's also a link that I'm going to post to a study that I found. It's just the abstract, using a technique called emotional freedoms technique. And actually what I'll do is I'll post some video on how to use that. But it's actually a really, really cool concept where you actually use this process of desensitizing yourself or de-associating a fear with something new. So you're reinterpreting a fearful experience into something that is calming and relaxing, so that you're actually changing your brain and changing your experience with it. So I think that's it for now. All that I have to say. That's quite a bit longer than I was expecting it to be, but good to know for next time. I don't expect it to be this long. I want to have a little bit more opportunity for discussion, so I will cut it down and give you something a little bit more snip-bitty for the next time. So I'll pause here, and perhaps what we'll do is if anyone has any questions or any thoughts or any topics they want to talk about, you can email me, or you can post us on the community, and we'll try and see what we can do.
Mindy, there actually is a question in our Q&A forum. There's a question here from someone saying, I am afraid of maths,
Okay.
but how would I try to get rid of it? Any suggestions?
Ooh, so afraid of math, like doing math.
I assume that's what they mean.
Yeah, that's a good one. So I'm just gonna, try and think really quickly about what you might want to do. So I don't know, like, okay, so I know for me, I used to be really afraid of math, doing math in front of other people. Doing it by myself, it's not a big deal, it's either right or wrong. But it's particularly when I'm doing it in front of other people. I also read somewhere that, I can't remember, but that just intuitively, you know the answer a lot more than you think you do. So I started doing this process where I would just guess what the answer was, like in very simple situations. So, not too simple that it was obvious if you're wrong, but basically just guessing it. And so I didn't have the same loading on it, and then I would continue to do that, and then that sort of gave me more of the confidence to do math in front of other people, even though I was using a different way of doing it. I think you could also do that very simply where, let's say you get like a couple of your friends, if this is really something to change, get a couple people together who you feel absolutely safe with and let them give you math questions, and you do them in the presence of them. And what you'll realize is that they're not going to attack you. They're not going to hate you. They're not going to run away. They're not going to say you're an idiot or stupid or any of those things. And what you're going to end up doing is realizing that it's a safe space. And there you take away the fear memory. So you start, eventually what you do is you start to extinguish that memory, because it probably is a memory from somewhere where something happened negatively and you formed that association. You may not remember what it is, but it probably happened. Probably in school at some point, a teacher or another kid said, "You're stupid," or "You don't know what you're doing," and it became this really strong pairing. So we need to loosen that pairing, reduce it, and you can do that by just creating your own little safe classroom and then starting that, and then you can bring that out into the real world, and eventually you'll be able to do it. And I think actually you can overcome that, just like I overcame doing public speaking. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you for your question. Mandy, I do have a question as well. I'm actually just wondering if there's been any research around whether there's particular pairings that are stronger than others to change. So, like, for instance, in that particular study, they were doing smell. And then you were also talking about like if you had a fear of dogs, using the sound of dogs. And I'm just wondering if there's any kind of research around whether maybe, say, the smell of a dog or the sound of a dog might be more effective.
No, I don't know actually. So smells are particularly powerful because what they actually, and I'm going to sort of theorize here, but the olfactory system, so one of our brain systems that it's the one that's involved in our smell. It's actually very closely related to the limbic system, so parts of it are within our limbic system. So I mentioned that the limbic system is our emotional center. So for whatever reason, our smells seem to be particularly tied to our emotional system. So I think pairing it with a smell might actually be interesting. It could actually make something more fearful, but it could also, I mean, that might be why in this study they were able to reduce that, because the smell was so powerful that if you take away that ingredient, that the fear just sort of falls apart because it's such an important ingredient. So I don't actually know the answer to that, but that's a really good question. It's actually got me thinking about how that whole system might be working. So that's great.
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting with like PTSD and that type of thing, especially like in military application for soldiers and that type of thing. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, we could do an episode at some point on just like aromatherapy and what's happening with that, because that actually is like a whole other segment that we could talk about, just in terms of what's actually being activated and what smells are helpful. I haven't looked at the research recently, but I know like years ago I looked at it and there wasn't a lot of strong evidence, but I'm sure there's a lot more since I've looked, so it'd be worth a review.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing, and thank everybody for watching. I hope more people will ask questions. We can certainly take questions in our YouTube channel in the comment section, and we'll also have some more in-depth dialogue on our meetup group if you guys want to join us there, which there is a link on our YouTube page as well. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'm going to end the broadcast here. So thank you, Mandy, for sharing this, and look forward to the next one.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.